floor is yours. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yun-seong. In front of the renowned scholars, I am very delighted to be invited to this important forum. As was introduced, I would like to talk about the Gutenberg's matter type printing, which was regarded as the world's biggest event, and then my review of the world's first exploration of the type road. This is the table of contents. And then, so I'd like to explain the background for our exploration of the type road. And second, Gutenberg's development of the typography and the dissemination of his invention, and our doubts about the invention of matter type printing created by Gutenberg, whether it was independently developed by Gutenberg or he has obtained some information from other countries. And the fourth, many Chinese scholars have argued that their typology has been propagated to the West. I will also share my information about that. And fifth, and regarding the fourth, if that is not the case, we have the possibility that Korean matter type printing might have been disseminated toward the West. In the early 1200s, the movable matter type printing was introduced in Goryeo dynasty. It might have been disseminated to the West, or the early Joseon dynasty during the regimes of the King Taejong and Sejong. Our matter type printing technology was passed over to the West. Then our exploration of the type road, and in my conclusion, I will deliver my messages. And this is the contents of my presentation. I'm not an expert or scholar of this area, but I'd like to introduce myself. In 1995, I produced the documentary film titled Jikji, and in 2000, I also produced another trilogy, the documentary titled Movable Matter Type, The Great Invention. And in 2003, following these two documentaries, I produced another documentary programs, so which featured Goryeo dynasty and the Joseon dynasty, which developed this movable matter type and improved them. And then I also introduced the Western scholars' views on our argument. I directly refuted the argument of the Chinese scholars. I've never seen a very in-depth research of Korean scholars who are just directly refuting the arguments made by the Chinese scholars. So in my documentary, I featured the contents that was also covered by the Dr. Hwang Jung-ha in the morning. And so whenever this matter printing type was passed to Japan, it actually served as a catalyst of the development of printing industry in Japan. And we also had might have had a significant influence on China. Even though I only could briefly touch upon these stories in my documentary, but I have obtained lots of information And I'd like to focus on the possibility of Gutenberg's matter type printing's dissemination for the world. And after the first release of my first documentary film, then I luckily obtained more information. I created the second documentary. So first edition, described the possibility that Gutenberg was a real inventor and the engineer of this technology. And the second episode, I just featured then the possibility of type road. In this trilogy of the film, I believe that this type of the contents and the story has to be discussed. But luckily, I found this article of objecting the international recognition of Gutenberg's invention. So Mr. Agura Arcas, the researcher, and Dr. Per Nadam, so conducted researches and also performed any very scientific test on the matter types created by Gutenberg, and they refuted the previous studies, arguing that the Gutenberg's printing technology was the world's oldest movable matter types. These two experts argued that we can clearly say that Gutenberg's invention was the world's oldest matter type printing. In order to argue that the Korean matter type printing was the world's oldest, we have to have very clear the written document or record proving that fact. So without that record, we had to compare these two technologies with the other types of evidence. I wanted to gain more information from Dr. Per Nadam, and I sent him the couple of emails. So I got some responses, but he finally rejected our proposal about the interview. But later there was another study done by another scholar. And then before going in depth of the Gutenberg's invention, I have to tell you that so Gutenberg's printing technology won the international recognition. The Times selected 100 events that totally transformed the world. The Gutenberg's invention topped the whole list. It clearly shows that the world so recognized his technology as the best one in the history of mankind. It even bet the very well-known events. And this is the process of the creation of Gutenberg's matter type printing. I will briefly touch upon the process. He's a member of the noble family in the Mainz, one city of Germany. It is located in the southern part of Germany with 300,000 population. Mainz is also known for the very large-scale cathedral of Europe. So he's from the noble families. And during the times of Gutenberg, there were many coats of arms of noble families. They were stored in many museums. And we could also find the coat of arms of the Gutenberg's family. And they used the kind of beggars as a feature in their coat of arms. So it was very unique. I could not find any other description but I just could assume that his family has extended a lot of support to the poor families in his town. He used to live in Mainz, and then he moved to Strasbourg in France. And the reason for that was that so during the times of the guilds of different industries in Germany, they raised their voice asking for the donation by noble families. He might have moved to Strasbourg to avoid this request from the guilds. After moving to Strasbourg, he decided to manufacture reflectors. It was just worn by many people in their head or in their garments. So many pilgrims wanted to visit the cathedral to show their dedication to the religion. Because the Iron Cathedral was a home to the many relics related to the Christian history, the Holy Land. So Strasbourg was located at the entrance of the path to the Cathedral of Aachen. So he believed the many pilgrims might want to purchase these reflectors. So on your right side, you could see the reflector, and then at the left side, you could see the Cathedral of Aachen, which displayed the garments of the Virgin Mary. And then some people believed, so with the reflectors, they could be pleased with the Jesus. But in 1339, due to the spread of the Black Death, and this visit of a pilgrimage was canceled. So his business broke out, and his investors filed a lawsuit against him. And one of his investors in the document about the lawsuit argued that the Gutenberg hid that there's a special machine called the press. So there were speculations that the press was actually used to print books at that time. And also people assume that the press is a sign of its adventure and a new type of business and new technology. In 1448, as I told you, there was a record about the press. And then in 1448, there was another record in which Gutenberg borrowed 150 florins, which is equivalent to the 10 million won as of the value of current times. And he actually did that. The person who lent the money, he also borrowed this money from other person, because it shows that he believed the possibility of the success of the new business of Gutenberg. This might be used as a seed money for printing business by Gutenberg. And in the late 1449, he acquired another investor called Johannes Pust. So with this funding, he successfully prepared for the launching of printing business. As Mr. Huang explained during the morning sessions, he brought some part of his printed books to the book fair in Frankfurt. in the March in 1455, then he printed the book called the 42-line Bible. He actually sold this Bible prints as a pre-order, but it was very successfully sold out. He was a very skilled entrepreneur, but he didn't have a good luck, so he could not make money from his businesses. In the late stages, he just spent his life in a monastery, then he passed away in that monastery. We had a chance to visit Gutenberg in Germany. And it was also known to be as a city of rotor machine. And then in the main hall of the museum, his rotor machine was displayed. And there was a time gap of 100 years between the Gutenberg and this another German inventor of the rotor machine. But this display, his machine shows that his invention made a great contribution to the development of the printing industry in Germany. And the Luther's Reformation ideology has been successfully disseminated throughout the European continent with the invention of Gutenberg. So he paid homage to the invention. So we still have some doubts whether he was the inventor or who actually had the influence on the development of the machine by Gutenberg. He has independently created this machine, but there is no written record about the fact. Based on our research, after he made a failure with the selling of the reflector, he suffered from the damage. And then he challenged another business called the printing. And then he successfully printed the 42-line Bible. But there was some time gap. So during the 8 or the 10 years, he successfully completed the printing technology. Therefore, we have doubts about his independent invention of the machine. During that time, about 100 years ago, the Goryeo dynasty invented this movable metal type, and the central government itself led this development. And then it was handed over to the Joseon dynasty. During the Joseon dynasty, another improved typefaces, 개미자, 갑인자, were developed. And according to their records, 경인자 and 개미자 were widely used. And then, but King Sejong was not satisfied with the technology and the quality of these two typefaces. So he asked the scientist Jang Yong-sil to enhance the quality of the metal types. So during these two dynasties, even though the heavy investment and the strong leadership of the two governments, we made a huge success about the development of the metal types, but we were not sure, even though before that stage, the wood block, the printing technology was introduced. So what has actually shifted this wood block printing to the movable metal types? So it took us more than 100 years. How could Gutenberg complete his technology within an order of 8 to 10 years, which is very short period of time? So we have much doubt about the possibility that he was the inventor of this printing machine. And I have met many scholars in other countries, and many argue that they need more researches and more records. They clearly argue that the originator was Korea, but they have also doubts about the invention by Gutenberg. Another possibility is that Gutenberg might have obtained information from other inventors. Then who had actually influence on him? I strongly argue that he might have won the information from people from Korea. I met with another Korean scholar. He wrote a book about the Chinese matter type printing and then the dissemination of this Chinese technology toward the West. It was designated as one of the high quality books in China. He argued in his book, before the dissemination of this matter type, the invention of the matter print types here in Korea, in China, the ordinary person called the Pilseng created movable matter type. Its invention was found by high-ranking official of the Chinese government. So we could not know why this invention was not widely known throughout China. Then before the beginning of the Mongolian, Great Mongol Empire, there was a country called West Xia and another country. Then in these two countries, wood block printing was introduced. Then 100 years passed in the city, Chinese city, and another high-ranking official, Yun-seong, introduced wood block printing again. It was just before the establishment of the Mongol Empire, and then later, so with the collapse of the Mongolian Empire, this country was incorporated into Myeong Dynasty. The wood block printing, which was introduced to Uyghur and the empire in Central Asia region. The Chinese scholars argue that their technology was passed over to other countries, including the West. So during the Mongolian Empire era, the world's highest level of exchanges and trading were made between the West and the East. And according to the Professor Thomas Francis Mascata, there was the high possibility that this metal printing technology was passed over to the West. But according to the records about the introduction of this technology to the West, it doesn't show any record about the concurrent introduction of technology into the Western countries. So still there is a 100 years of a time gap between the East and the West about the introduction of metal type printing. So he just directly rejected the chances that the invention of metal type printing was handed over to the West to influence the Gutenberg's invention. And then let's look at the possibility that the Korea's metal type printing was disseminated to the West. Even though the Goryeo dynasty invented the metal type print, still there is a time gap of the 150 to 200 years. But we could say that only Joseon dynasty era, it might have been passed over to the Western countries. In that time, King Sejong developed sophisticated typeface 갑인자, and it's the beginning of the peak season of the metal type printing. Therefore, we could say that there is a high possibility that this technology might have been handed over to Gutenberg and Germany. And there, during the time, there was a Timur Empire. The Timur Empire may have served as a kind of mediating country to hand over this technology to the European countries. And then the Dr. Hodgson from the England, he refuted this possibility because during the era of the Timur Empire, 800 camels were used by the merchants from China. So they brought this lots of the gifts to Chinese empire emperors. But he also added that Gutenberg might have gained information from people from the East, specifically from Korea or the Joseon. At least very basic principles of the metal type printing technology. But with this the basic information, he might have made half of his whole success. So during this Timur Empire era, there was a kind of the Silk Road to facilitate the trade between the East and the West. And in the Russia, the merchants from Russia even went to the other Mongolian countries and then Central Asian countries. This Uyghur the empire served as the country where the merchants from different countries got together to conduct their trade. Also, they are connected with the River Rhine. And Gutenberg's main city of its businesses are the Frankfurt, Mainz, and Strasbourg. And so even in Frankfurt, still the book fairs are held every year. And so could you wrap up? And in Korea, in case of Korea, so from the Silla dynasty, we started exchanges with the Arabian countries, and the many cars from the Arabian countries, they were invited to the coronation event here in Silla and the Goryeo dynasty. And this maritime road was created, connecting Korea to China, to Arabian countries, even to European countries. Even though we have failed to find out the written documentation about the fact, we could still assume that there was possibilities of passing this metal type printing technology to the Western countries. It was the main message of my documentary films. In the Cheongju MBC, the broadcasting company, after broadcasting this program, then we held an academic conference with the sponsorship of the Cheongju Oli Printing Museum. And the well-known writers who wrote the books which describe this type road and the Gutenberg's invention and Korea's invention of the metal type printing, and the other broadcasting companies also produced the relevant programs. And also the Dr. Yun-seong from France, he also completed his research on this area. In my conclusion, the exploration of the type road, I believe that the government has to take the leadership in leading this project. And many are very skeptical about the success of this project, but I believe our efforts to identify this type road without any effort to clearly demonstrate that we are the origin of the metal type printing, it will be just left permanently as one of the mysteries in the world. Therefore, to promote the types into the world, we have to actively take the actions to identify the origin of the metal type printing in the world.